As is now very clear, President Donald Trump has his intention to end the Russia-Ukraine war by negotiation at the earliest possible moment, at the best possible conditions. But now we're starting to get a little bit more clarity on what he may plan to do and how serious he is to want to bring this war to a conclusion. There has been an executive order signed that has frozen all aid. This is one of the things that President Trump talked about at his inauguration, that he was going to halt foreign aid until he could determine for sure whether it was in America's interest to do so. At least so far, the only express exemptions from that is Egypt and Israel. Other than that, there have been no specific prohibitions. And of course, that means Ukraine. And that has a lot of people in Ukraine concerned. It has a lot of fear in parts of Europe. And definitely among some of the fighters on the ground on the Ukraine side, because they're wondering what the future holds. And listen, everyone should be very clear. There shouldn't be any confusion on anybody that the money is not going to keep flowing as it was before. And you may recall that the previous administration always talked about money, how important it was to get more money in, because they always said this was going to be a big deal on the battlefield. You may recall the administration just went to the mat to try to get $61 billion passed at the end of 2023 and then early into 2024. And the administration continued to blame the Republican Congress for dragging its heels, et cetera. And some of the problem even at that time was that many of the Republicans, then Senator J.D. Vance being one of the key ones, was saying, what's the plan? What are you going to do with this money? How is it going to help? How's it going to change anything on the battlefield? What are your objectives? What is the conditions for this money? What is it supposed to accomplish, et cetera? None of those things were ever given. Only this category, this headline of it's desperately needed. It can turn the tide, et cetera. Well, they ended up passing $61 billion in May of 2024. And then, as I've shown many times with graphically so, Ukraine started losing faster after that date. So there's many things that went into that. It's not certainly a product of getting more money, but the point being that it was clear, graphically so, that just putting more money is not going to change the outcome on the battlefield. And then at the end of the Biden administration, they were unable to get even all that money out. So even though Trump has actually suspended, and it appears specifically Ukraine is one of everybody else in the world who's had their aid suspended, the question is, are his hands tied? And you may recall this from outgoing Pentagon spokesman Sabrina Singh, who was asked just days before the end of the Biden administration, how much money is left in the kitty?
I can tell you that there's going to be a few billion left in authority for the next administration to decide what to do when it comes to Ukraine.
Why were you unable to use all the authority, the 4.8 billion, I think it was? Why not? Why are you leaving any left given the urgency of the situation?
Well, you might remember earlier last year, we had a gap in funding that we were not able to restock our own shelves and our own supplies. So when we weren't able to do that and we were operating under a time when we were not able to resupply our own stocks, that prevented us from getting PDAs out the door. And you saw us pause for several weeks, in fact, on being able to supply Ukraine with what it needs on the battlefield. With every single PDA, we have to weigh it against our own readiness. And if the secretary and the chairman do not feel that we can provide a package at a certain amount of time, we will not be able to provide that package. That delay.
That's enough, Gary. We can cut that off right there. That was very telling, that last part especially, because she just conceded there that the Secretary of Defense and other senior officials had to weigh carefully giving something to Ukraine if it meant diminishing our capabilities. And several times we had to stop. And she says PDA, that's basically a presidential drawdown authority, to where basically things that are already in the American inventory, i.e. for your national security, had to be taken out and sent to another country. And so if it got below a certain threshold, then they had to say, well, hang on, that's a little too low. The fact that we even got to that point, that had nothing to do with how much money was there. As she just explained to you, the money was there. It was allocated. It had already been made available, and it could have been sent out at any time. But it would cause us to go below a threshold. So we had to stop and wait, let some things get go through the process of either acquisition or into physical production, and then they would get some more out the door. So that shows you it's just incremental stuff, and the capabilities, i.e. our capabilities, are insufficient. Our capabilities are insufficient to support support of many nations, one of 50, according to what the administration bragged about all the time, to give to a single country, Ukraine, in its fight over there. What does that tell you about the state of stocks of the United States of America? Our capacity, should we get into an unexpected fight, a Pearl Harbor kind of thing that comes out of nowhere, a 9/11 kind of strike that, surprises everyone, for which we're not prepared to go to war, that tells you that our war stocks are critically low, and that our capacity to surge and sustain combat, should we get sucked into a war like the Ukraine side has done, that's gone on now 3 years, we can't do it. It would take us, like it did Russia, about a year and a half from the time that the president might give we're going to go to a full wartime mobilization, and we're going to, convert everything. We're going to ramp up all the capabilities. It would be minimum of a year and a half before we could build up. And let me just tell you, in modern combat, especially if you're talking about going up against a peer or near peer, that a year and a half, you could die in a year and a half. The country could be defeated. The military could be defeated. So the last thing we need to do is say, all right, well, there's still $4 billion. We can just shovel that on out the door there because it's already done. And then we'll put a pause on here. But we haven't done that yet. And now that we're going to talk about this shortly, we have now a Secretary of Defense who's going to look into these exact matters here. And I assure you that the incoming administration is not keen to finding out where the highest, the most risk that we can face and still give something to somebody. They're not going to be looking to do that. President Trump came into office, and his signature statement was, and he actually signed an executive order to this effect, it's going to be America First foreign policy. And that means the policy here. So Trump has signaled in every way you can, financially, diplomatically, and politically, that there is a significant hard change coming to America's foreign policy, specifically as it relates to Ukraine. Now, everyone should be reading the tea leaves here. And some things you don't have to read or interpret or read between the lines. Some things are expressly stated, but all the things, both things that are stated and unstated, because there is still some uncertainty about some of the things that Trump is going to do or how he's going to do it. But the direction is unambiguous and black and white. So especially if you're Europe and if you're Ukraine, you should be saying, all right, this is where we're going. Maybe we'll go like this, maybe we'll go like that, but we are definitely going to a negotiated settlement. What do we need to do to get ahead of the curve here? But as has been a hallmark throughout this war, there are those, at least in the outgoing administration in the U.S., lots of people still in the U.S. who consider themselves opinion leaders, et cetera, or so-called experts, and definitely people in the European Union still have not come to grasp with what's happened. Here's just a couple of days ago, the new foreign minister of the European Union, who's talking like this is early 2022, not early 2025.
For too long, we have offered Russia alternatives, hoping that it would choose cooperation and economic prosperity for its people over fraudulent imperialistic ambitions. But instead, Russia's defense industry is churning out tanks, glide bombs, artillery shells in vast quantities. Together, EU member states' economies are 17 times bigger than that of Russia's economy. We must force his hand to show him that he will lose, and stop him before he attacks one of our own. Europe's failure to invest in military capabilities also sends a dangerous signal to the aggressor. Weakness invites them in. President Trump is right to say that we don't spend enough. It's time to invest. We all need to be realistic about Russia. Russia poses existential threat to our security today, tomorrow, and for as long as we underinvest in our defense.
It's so ironic there toward the end of that soundbite that she says we have to be realistic. You put a period right there. Exactly. That's what you need to do. You need to be realistic. This is, folks, this is not rocket science. This is not hard to figure out. I know human affairs are complicated, but there are some things that are not complicated. One, the war is coming to an end. Number two, the balance of power is irrevocably on the Russian side. And to ignore that means you're going to get more Ukrainians killed. And then the third one is just financial sense. Look, you don't have the capacity because you haven't invested it in 3 years of fighting. So you talk about, sure, we've underinvested. Now you're figuring that out? Seriously? Now, at the end of 3 years, you want to start doing something like that and start putting some more? What that tells you is that the governments of Europe genuinely, behind the scenes, do not view Russia as an existential threat, as she claimed in the end of that clip. Because if you did, you would have been doing that like on the second or third day of the war. Not even the first year of the war, but certainly you wouldn't be coming to that realization at the end of 3 full years of war. So I don't know if they're just detached from reality, that they have been living in this country of spin for so long that you think you can just say whatever you want, irrespective of what's true on the ground. Now all of a sudden they're going, oh snap, we can't. And so, but they can't come to that realization. They can't be realistic. So we have to manufacture that Russia represents, by its existence, an existential threat to the European Union. And they have only figured this out now. Now they have to start building their forces up. Well, listen, folks, the situation right now, Russia has an armed force, an active duty armed force of somewhere around 1.5 million total. About 700,000 of those are inside the borders of what was Ukraine when this war broke out. So you're talking like the biggest, and Zelensky has told us this at a speech in Davos a couple of days ago, early this week, that the Ukraine side is the biggest army in Europe, and the next one is France at 200,000. And not many of those are actual warfighters. All that support, logistics, a bunch of other stuff, non-warfighting capacities, institutional, etc. So there's a very small number of actual fighters there, and they have no experience, no combat experience at all. So you imagine going up against somebody with combat experience in the Russian armed forces, which is several times bigger than yours and more experienced and more capable than the French one is. So you haven't done anything for 3 years to change the size of your force, to have a huge spike in your defense expenditure, because you don't actually believe Russia's coming after you. That's self-evident. That's like me saying I'm afraid that there's going to be a home invasion, and I don't lock my door at night. I don't get a weapon. I don't get a security system. I don't spend any money. I don't do anything. I just say, oh, yeah, they're coming after me. And you take no action. If you really think somebody's coming after you, you're definitely going to get an alarm system. You're probably going to get some kind of defensive weapon, something to protect you. If you think people are coming in, you're going to do things. You're going to put, floodlights out in the front, whatever. You're going to take action if you really believe that they're coming after you. They really don't. And now then, here's what the President Trump's team is signaling. Here's General Kellogg talking about how he's going to reach a diplomatic end.
The most important thing I think everybody needs to understand, it's not going to end kinetically. What I mean by that, it's not going to end by killing each other. This is going to end, and he said this yesterday when he was at Davos, that the key role of not only diplomacy, but economics as well. Let me just use one example, oil. The price of oil right now is probably, when you look at Brent or WTI, the baseline pricing, it's about $78 a barrel. So Russia's getting billions of dollars of money from oil sales. What if you drop that to $45 a barrel, which is basically the baseline break-even point? That's what he made the comment yesterday. And this is where the president comes from. He comes from it economically, and he comes from it diplomatically. That's how we're going to finish this thing off. It's not going to be done by killing each other.
Okay, so there's some pros and cons to what he said right there. Let's look at just the overall message first. The war is coming to a diplomatic end, and he'll use some other means economically, but it ain't going to happen militarily. So when you had the Trump administration, the Biden administration, their moniker from the beginning was "for as long as it takes" militarily, that they're going to push them out to the 1991 borders. They said that for probably the better part of 2 years. And then they finally started changing maybe we can just get a better outcome, something like that. And then they kept throwing money at it, and they tried to get barrelfuls of money out the door the last couple of weeks of the administration, et cetera, militarily. So they still absolutely refused any kind of diplomacy, wouldn't even talk to the Russians, whether it was at the presidential level other than just on the sidelines of one a conference, I think, where the Secretary of State to Minister of Foreign Affairs level wouldn't even have any conversations. Now here comes Trump inside saying, all right, we're definitely going down this path. Forget the military. That ain't going to happen. You see now with the freezing of aid. Whether there's still $4 billion left in the presidential drawdown from the $61 billion last year, there is no talk about any kind of additional packages coming after that. Zero. They haven't even broached the subject. All they're doing is saying, we'll try some economic levers. Now, there's some real problems with that. If you think that trying to lower the price, manufacturing, lowering the oil price to $45, like you can just pick and choose the global oil price because it works for the United States, that ain't going to happen either, folks. That's not how oil price works. That's not how the oil industry works, because it's a global commodity, and there's all these different countries that are involved. They all have their own independent financial, economic, and political reasons why they do things. And you're not going to see the Saudis say, yeah, we'll just take and just lop off dozens, scores of dollars from the oil price because it benefits the United States, even though that'll cost us because now then we won't make as much money, et cetera. That's just not going to happen. Plus, it just doesn't work that way. You can't independently decide what the price of oil is. That's been an issue forever. You can try and influence in certain ways, but that's really all you can do. So that's not really going to happen. And plus, even if it did, the Russians have been very plain of saying that's not going to change anything that happens on the ground, because they have all the natural resources, to include petroleum products that they have, that they can fight the war internally by whatever they have. And they've shown that they're near sanction proof at this point, because anything you do has negative counteractions. Then certainly our sanctions have reverberated harder on Europe than they ever did on Russia. I think they're now listed as the fourth largest economy in the world, which is kind of embarrassing that after all these things that we did for 3 years, the United States and the West combined, Russia's place in the global pecking order rose. And of course, we've talked about a lot of things. Now there's the BRICS issue, and it just keeps moving things further away. We obviously have the military component where Russia's closer to China, North Korea, Iran, and all kinds of folks getting together that we don't want to get together. All these negative consequences. Those things are, moving, like a glacial speed and with a glacial power. I mean, you can't just come in and say, "Boop, we're going to change that and stop it now." It just doesn't work that way. On the ground, you actually see that the Russians continue to win. And so let's take a real quick look before we pivot to a different subject here. What about the Ukraine point of this? I talked about the American administration, talked about the Europeans, kind of where they are, but what about Zelensky? Does he read the tea leaves? Does he see that the foreign aid has been frozen, that nobody in the administration is talking about anything about any additional aid, and they are talking about having a diplomatic solution? Now, if you're the commander-in-chief of that formation, what should you be doing? Should you be going on and just continuing to act like everything's fine and everything that the previous administration does is going to go forward, and one day magically you're going to come out with a diplomatic win that you couldn't achieve on the battlefield? I mean, one would hope that he wouldn't think about that. And at least at Davos earlier this week, he did at least indicate that he recognizes something's changed.
Right now, it's not clear whether Europe will even have a seat at the table when the war against our country ends. And we see how much influence China has on Russia. And we are deeply grateful to Europe for all the support it's given our country during this war. But will President Trump listen to Europe? Or will he negotiate with Russia and China without Europe?
Well, and he went on there to talk about how, hey, Europe, we got to stick together. We Europeans, we got to stick together, and we need you guys to pony up security guarantees because, I don't even know what's going to happen in Washington. So let's do that. Well, Europe doesn't have it, folks. I mean, you see, France has the biggest army at 200,000, and they are not combat ready. Everybody else is smaller. The population in any of these countries, they may not like Russia. They may be okay to an extent, given a lot of their cash and some of their military stuff, but none of them are saying, yeah, let's go to war with Russia. Let's send our troops to die on behalf of Kiev. No one's doing that. No one's going to do that. And we also have Vladimir Putin and Sergei Lavrov both saying you're not going to have a seat at the table. That's pretty stunning, and that's not hyperbole, folks, because the Russian side said, how can we sign a deal with a guy who has violated his term of office? So it's not democratically elected anymore. He's just going on into perpetuity. He got elected once. His term came to an end last year. They didn't have an election. There's not one planned right now. So he said, why would we sign any kind of a negotiated deal with a guy who's not even valid in his own constitution? Whoever comes in next may have a different viewpoint. So he said they're not willing to do that. Lavrov also issued that and said that, by the way, it's even worse than that, because Zelensky himself signed a law, I think it was in 2022, that prohibited him from even entering into negotiations with Russia so long as Vladimir Putin's still in office. I don't know if you've noticed, Putin is still in office. So according to Ukrainian law, they can't even talk. So when Zelensky's wondering, are we even going to have a seat at the table? Well, according to you, no, you're not going to. So all this tells you over and over that Europe and the Ukrainian leadership are still willfully blind and oblivious to what's coming. Trump is signaling in as strong ways as he can that he's going to have a negotiated settlement. And listen, Trump himself has kind of given mixed messages, which it seems to be part of his modus operandi anyway. I think he likes to do that. He's talking positive things about Russia on one hand and, warnings on the other hand about, you can do this the hard way or the easy way, et cetera. And that just kind of gets a lot of curious looks from the Russians, because the bottom line is the Russians are keenly aware of the reality of this. They know the balance of power is irrevocably on their side. They know they have all the resources, the money, the capability, the troop numbers, the ammunition, the weapons, the stockpiles, the industrial capacity to keep this going indefinitely at this current rate. They know all this stuff. And they know that on the Ukraine side, not only do they not have the manpower, and according to the Ukrainian general himself, Syrsky, they now can't even make up for the losses. So their army is getting smaller by the day, and their warfighting capacity is going down by the day. They know that all of Western Europe combined can't come close to matching what has been given, and that's clearly not been enough to slow down. So there is no rational path for any actor in this drama here to think that you can do anything besides reach a negotiated settlement. And the longer you wait, the greater the chances are that it's in Russia's increasing favor. We've shown you from December 2021, when they could have had a deal that would have prevented war. They didn't do it. It was all other than Crimea, everything would have stayed within Ukrainian control, Kiev control, to include all of the Donbass, Luhansk and Donetsk. And then in 2022, in February of 2020, April of 2022, the Istanbul agreements, that could also have stayed in Kiev control. Russia would eventually had agreed to that. If conditions were met, they would have withdrawn all their troops back into Russia, so long as certain things going back to the Minsk agreements had been agreed to in terms of political autonomy for the people, the Russian-speaking people in the eastern part of the country. They didn't do that. They didn't do November 2022. They didn't do June of last summer. And so now every time, I've been saying this from the beginning of the war, and it is playing out so graphically, not because I'm brilliant seeing this, I just see what's on the ground. Now then, the terms they could get today are worse than any of the ones going back I just talked about there. And if you wait till tomorrow, they'll be worse still, because the Russian side and Putin has been unambiguous that he said there will be no ceasefire. There will be no tactical pause. We are going to continue on fighting and capturing territory, which they do every single day. Every single day. Now, Velika Novoselka, which we talked about a little bit yesterday, which was cut in two. Now then today, less than 24 hours later, the entire southern part of the city has been captured by the Russians. It's now only a matter of time, probably a matter of days before the rest of Velika Novoselka falls. And that's just one part there. And of course, now then that makes it easier to go into other places and et cetera, because the losses keep piling up for the Ukraine side. Now is the time to reach a negotiated settlement. And if you keep waiting, then at some point there's not going to be any negotiations. There's just going to be terms of surrender issued. That's the stark choice that we face. And we'll see when, if any point, does Ukraine and the European Union catch up with where the Trump administration is today. Now, I want to shift gears here in the amount of time we have left to talk about something else. Speaking of American national security, we finally have a Secretary of Defense. Pete Hegseth was voted in last night. If you've been paying any attention at all, you see that it was a very contentious issue. There's lots of questions about his qualifications, about some past personal actions that he has done, and whether he violated any laws. A lot of that all was discussed. And then came the big moment last night with a vote. And after all the senators, both Republican and Democrat, had voted independents, it came down to a 50-50 split, which then had to be settled by the Vice President of the United States.
Are there any senators in the chamber who wish to vote or change a vote? If not, on this vote, the yeas are 50 and the nays are 50. The Senate being equally divided, the Vice President votes in the affirmative, and the nomination is confirmed.
So there you have it. Now we have Pete Hegseth in. And listen, it was a hard fought, hard battle. Even just, I think, barely 2 hours before the vote was taken, there was lots of senators going to the floor making impassioned pleas about some saying he's definitely what we need, we should pass him, and others saying that the opposite, that he should not be passed over. One in particular that I wanted to highlight because it's kind of symptomatic of what a lot of the people in Washington were thinking about, and that was Senator Tim Kaine, who went to the floor to argue that there were other people, even Republicans, that could have been nominated by President Trump. And I want you to notice something at the end of this clip, because he cites a couple of guys that he said, boy, if you only had somebody like this, it would have been swell.
Mr. President, you and I both know this. There are so many good public officials who have aligned on the Republican side, who have supported President Trump, who have their own credentials in this body. I could name a bunch, but I'm worried I'd forget one and then get in trouble with one of the ones I don't name. But in this body, there are senators who have served honorably in the military and are well qualified for the position of Secretary of Defense. In the House, there are members who are loyal to this president, who have served honorably in the military and are qualified to be Secretary of Defense. We have governors, we have mayors, we have leaders of companies who have supported this president and are loyal to his agenda and could get a 98-2 vote like Mark Esper did, or a 98-1 vote like General Mattis did.
Yeah, that's what the objective is. The objective is to get somebody from the standard class, a governor, a senator, member of the House, a general, something like that. Somebody that we like. Even if they're Republicans, hey, we can still get along with them. Like Mark Esper and General James Mattis. Those are the ones he highlights. Like, the objective is, what can we do to make everybody happy so that it's a 98-2 vote instead of a 51-50, requiring the Vice President of the United States to break the tie? Well, let's take a look at that, because what that tells you a whole lot about how the blob mentality is that now Trump is going to try to wade through, and Secretary of Defense Hegseth is going to have to navigate. And that is this blob that wants nothing to change. They want things to just continue on as they are, and they want just more of them. They want to replicate themselves. So that's just the same kind of people coming in and out. People who are good with the defense industrial base, people who are good, can be counted on politically, and then people who aren't going to do anything to rock the boat. They just want the status quo to keep going, keep the gravy train going, keep everybody that's in power happy. That's his objective. That's what he was focused on, that you could have. And as examples, he gave Mark Esper and General Mattis. Okay, who's going to do something different? Then you're going to have to break that mold and go something different. Now, a lot of things have been said about Hegseth, and a lot of people have made assessments. There's been others on the negative side been doing the same thing. But earlier this morning, I think literally just a couple hours ago, and maybe even less than that, he made a speech, I think when actually sworn in. And I'm going to show you, it's a little bit longer a clip than we normally show, but I think it's important because he's going to say a number of things here. But I want you to hear, in Hegseth's own words, who he is and what he plans to do.
All praise and glory to God. His will be done, and we're grateful to be here. And as I said in my hearing, it was Jesus and Jenny. I would not be here without you, sweetheart. Thank you so much. I want to thank the President of the United States, our Commander-in-Chief, Donald Trump. We could not have a better Commander-in-Chief than him. It is the honor of a lifetime, sir, to serve under you. We look forward to having the backs of our troops and having your back in executing peace through strength, in putting America first, and in rebuilding our military. Mr. Vice President, thank you for breaking the tie. It's not the last time, or not the first time the headline reads, Junior Enlisted Marine bails out Junior Army Officer. And, you know, some people were saying, well, 50-50, that's too tight. And Senator Mark Wayne Mullen was nice enough to take my kids up to the gallery to watch the actual moment that the Vice President sealed the deal. And they came running in. They said, Dad, instead of being sad about 50-50, 51-50, they said, Dad, you won in overtime. That's the perspective I like. So thank you throughout this process, Mr. Vice President, for being incredible. I also want to thank the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee. So many members of the Senate Armed Services Committee, we became fast friends in this process. The advice, the consent, the wisdom, the guidance. I look forward to working with all of you and other senators to ensure the Defense Department has what it needs, that our nation has what it needs, and that we're prepared to defend it in all moments. To my staff, amazing staff who were with us this entire process, I see so many of you through thick and thin. We used to look at the betting odds every once in a while on this. It was low at one point. Never do that. But we defied them. And there were so many folks on the inside and then allies on the outside who stood by us every single moment. And we are eternally grateful for that. And I want to thank the warfighters. I want to thank the men and women wearing the uniform. And I've said this before when I speak, and I mean it. Every time I stand at a podium and there's bright lights and cameras, the first thing that goes through my head are the guys that I served with on the battlefield. The men and the women who I lock shields with and put my life on the line with, who never get the spotlight, who never have the cameras, who people don't know what they did in dark and dangerous places. But I know. And at the Pentagon, we're going to remember and we're going to know. And we're going to think about those warriors with every single decision that we make. We will put America first. We will bring peace through strength. And the three principles I talked about are what we will bring to that Pentagon. Restore the warrior ethos in everything that we do. Rebuild our military and reestablish deterrence. We don't want to fight wars. We want to deter them, as you said. And we want to end them responsibly. But if we need to fight them, we're going to bring overwhelming and decisive force to close with and destroy the enemy and bring our boys home.
Okay, so whether he's going to do any of those things is an aspiration. We don't know. A lot of people have made a lot of bold statements at the beginning of their tenure, and then as time goes on and pressures become real, they don't do it. I don't know. We are going to continue to hold everybody's feet to the fire because we're unintimidated and uncompromised. No matter who's in office, no matter what's going on, we're going to bring you the truth as it happens. However, I will tell you that this, to me, is a breath of fresh air because he at least has a chance to do something besides just the status quo, besides just coming in from the defense industry and serving a period of time, building up your credentials, going back to the industry, making millions of dollars, all this kind of stuff. And that's just a routine thing, making decisions. One of the last things he said there, which at least as us sit here today, stand out the most. He said, every decision that we make is going to be based on the men and women serving in the uniform. And on America outcomes first, not whether it's going to get a damn contract passed for the defense industry, not whether it's going to make somebody else more cash somewhere. And look, I don't care what anybody has said. Actions indicate that a majority of the secretaries of defense have that way up at the top of the list of their decision makings. And other than lip service, I don't see very much concern about the troops. I'm sure they're there. I don't mean to imply that no one cares about our troops. I'm sure they all do. But the problem is they have not been at the top. They have been in the mix. We need somebody, and the people who are in the U.S. Armed Forces, people who wear the uniform right now, and I can speak as one who did, and I can just tell you, if I were still in there, I would be really excited about the prospects that maybe this guy is going to be different. Now, whatever may have happened in the past, I can't speak to, especially in any of his social or personal conduct issues. I can't speak to that. But right now, he is the Secretary of Defense. And this is what we have to focus on, because that's who we have and what's going to be there going forward. So some of the specific things he said are departures from what's happened here. And I'm going to get into those in just a second, but I want to tell you there's a piece out in Responsible Statecraft today by Kelly Vlahos, who we've had on our show before, is an excellent foreign policy analyst, military analyst. And she says, hey, okay, Hegseth is confirmed, but this is where we find out what his true mettle is. And many of the things she's talking about is some of the challenges he's going to face and what's going to be happening here. And I'll just tell you right off the top of the bat, she's absolutely right that there are a lot of challenges he's going to face. And one of them, and maybe the biggest one, is this institution. Now, you saw Tim Kaine there saying that we need another institution guy to come in, just like these other ones, Esper and Mattis, and you can fill in the blank, all the ones going back even before that. General Lloyd Austin, the outgoing him, another guy, classic with the credentials, but just did a horrific job with the Afghanistan withdrawal and an even worse job with the situation in the Russia-Ukraine war. Just horrific. He's going to be condemned in history by this. You will not be kind to that man, but he met all the criteria because he's standard data. Well, I got bad news for everybody. That's what exists in the bureaucracy of the Pentagon. All the services that are in there, all the senior people who've been in there for a long time, that's kind of their mentality. They like to replicate themselves. So the chances are pretty high that Hegseth is going to run smack dab into that because, we just got to be honest here. A lot of 4-star generals, 3-star generals are not going to be very keen to be taking orders from a guy who's a major. That's a mid-level rank. And they're not going to want to take some orders from a major who is a TV guy. That's how they'll view it. And so there is going to be a real chance that he gets undermined in many points here because, understand this, they want him to fail. There are many in the Pentagon, in and out of uniform, that want Hegseth to fail because they want to say, I told you he wasn't qualified, so now we got to bring in a guy from the swamp. Someone else who's equally qualified. That's what's going to happen. So even if Hegseth wants to do a lot of these specific things he mentioned there, he's going to have a hard row to hoe. It is not going to be easy for him. And he's going to need some really high quality people serving as his lieutenants and his sub-commanders and the various heads of organizations within the Defense Department. These folks are going to help determine whether he succeeds or not. But there's one other thing that if I could give one suggestion to the Secretary of Defense is that he go after the, quote, deadwood and try to call out some of these people. Now, there was some commentary by President Trump, I think after he got elected and before all this, the Hegseth brought into, even before Hegseth was mentioned, I think, that he said, hey, actually, no, this goes back even before the election. He said that we want to get rid of a lot of general officers. Now, that got a lot of people going crazy and said, oh, you're politicizing the military. And if they don't meet this quota of whether or not they're politically motivated, you're going to get rid of them. That's not what Trump said, first of all. He just said he wants to get rid of people who aren't performing. What a shock that would be. Why would we want to hold someone accountable for what they did or didn't do? That's not how the system works. I've personally observed general officers who were horrific failures at what they did get this big medal pinned on their chest and promoted to another star. It was just disgusting to me when I saw that. And that was hardly isolated. But that's what the mentality is of the people in it that keep replicating themselves, because those guys who failed and were promoted up are extremely loyal to making sure that the next generation comes in and looks just like them. So what I think that President Trump should do, and even aside, not even the Secretary of Defense, what really President Trump should do is what FDR did prior to World War II. Then at the time in the late 1930s, you had the Secretary of the Army, George C. Marshall, was charged by the president to get rid of the, quote, deadwood. And what they ended up doing was saying, hey, there's just been a lot of institutional rot in the military, especially since World War I. And a lot of people just got comfortable and just kind of staying in power and just enjoying their position. And they weren't mentally changed from the First World War. They were not tracking with what's going on. So they ended up getting rid of 600 officers, which they call Deadwood. And there was thousands, or a total of many, many senior leaders, especially colonels and generals. And during the war, they had really high standards that if you didn't prove yourself as a general officer and a commander within, I think it was 90 days, then they would fire you. And they did. They fired a lot of people. So they set this culture of excellence. You either perform or you're out. And that's exactly what we need. It doesn't need to be, some kind of political thing. I hope they would not do something like, okay, where are you on wokeness? Because that's what's going to determine. That doesn't even need to be in the picture. What needs to be in the picture, exclusively in the picture, and Hegseth has indicated that this is one of his criteria. Can you be a warfighter? Can you do these things? And he mentioned a handful of them there. He said he wants to bring the warfighter ethos in. There is no better way. And I can just tell you from somebody who served up to a lieutenant colonel, so that's just on the lower edge of the upper officer ranks. So I spent the majority of my time at the battalion level and below. And I can tell you for sure, all the way up here, we would die to have any leader that actually put the warfighter first, that actually had the mentality and the ethos, that didn't just hold other people accountable, but held himself accountable. That's what we wanted to see, and we would do anything for a leader like that. That's one of the reasons why I think that Hegseth has a chance to be the most effective Secretary of Defense that we've had in generations, because he said in the last of that clip, he's focused on the people. And if he's focused on the people and he's focused on bringing a warrior ethos into this, that says you have a high standard, you have to meet that standard, or you're going to be gone. And that sounds kind of harsh to some people, but that's what we need, folks. War is harsh. Combat is harsh. It's unforgiving. If you put people up there who don't belong, if you elevate people who don't belong, and then they get into a serious clash, men are going to die because of it. That did happen. Even with the culling, even with what George Marshall did prior to World War II, there were still some that got through. And when they got into the crucible of combat, they wilted. And men died because of it. Missions failed, and that always translates into men dying. So it needs to be a very high standard, ruthlessly adhered to. And I want to hear that. And I also love that he said in there that his idea is we want to reform the military, rebuild it, and then we want to avoid wars we don't need to fight, get out of wars, Ukraine, get out of wars that we don't need to be supporting. And then he said that we want to not fight any wars we don't need to, because we want to reestablish deterrence, was the way he put it there. And then one of the last things he said was, and this is something that, again, I would have died to have somebody like this in command and in leader while I was serving in uniform. We will win decisively if we have to fight. If we can't avoid war with diplomacy, if we can't use it through deterrence, and if war is forced on us, then we need to win decisively. And I'm all for that. That was my mentality, and some of the military leaders like Doug McGregor, who was my mentor and boss at various times during my career. It's like, if we fight, we will win decisively, and we will fight good, because we're going to be reformed. We're going to have the kinds of organization that you need. We're going to have the new mentality, the new tools of war, everything we need to actually fight and win decisively. We should not do that unless it is absolutely foisted upon us. Let me reiterate that one more time. This is not a code to, let's have a big, strong military so we can go conquering people. I'm out on that, way out on that. That is an abuse and a misuse of our armed forces. It is harmful to our country. But it sounds like they don't want to do that, because they said they want to avoid any wars they don't need. But we do need, the reason why I have a Department of Defense is if we're attacked by anybody, we need to have that kind of military. So I hope that's what he does. I hope he does what he actually says he's going to do. And I would advocate President Trump using, one of these Deadwood kind of mentalities and charge somebody and give them the authority to go and do that. There are ways to do it right. There are ways to do it effectively that end up with a much stronger military that has trusted, that goes all the way from the top to the bottom and from the bottom up. Loyalty works both ways. And if you get a good leader at the top who understands that, the whole military can be improved from where it is right now. And I really hope we see that. Thank you very much for watching today on a Saturday. We always appreciate you. Be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't on your way out. And we're going to have some great shows coming this week. You're not going to want to miss. Truly, we got some really good guests coming up. I'm really excited about some of them, especially toward the end of the week. But we'll tell you about those coming up next week. Thank you very much. We'll see you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.